Welcome to the Jeff Crilley Show. And now, here's Jeff Crilley.
Happy 4th of July, everyone, in DFW. On July 4th, 1776, our founding fathers put their lives on the line by drafting the Declaration of Independence. What do those words mean today, and what would our founding fathers think about the country that we've become? Obviously, America split off from Great Britain for some core values, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Debbie Georgatos is an author, speaker, and a radio host of her own, and she's one of the leading voices in a growing movement to refocus the country on its core values. She's the author of Ladies, Can We Talk? America Needs Our Vote. Debbie, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Okay,
so I think about the founding fathers, and I think about the risks that they were taking because, right? I mean, that's treason. They could have been killed for even signing this document, right?
Yes. Yeah, some were. Yes, it was a very, very brave step to take. And it was taken really after years of conversation in the colonies about, do we really have the right to break off from Britain and declare our independence? Do we have kind of an inherent right to liberty? And that's one of the beautiful ideas enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, is that there's all, as you mentioned, all men created equal, but also we have rights from God that include liberty. And so it was a philosophical advancement kind of for all of civilization for them to capture that idea, to believe it and capture it and write it down as the basis of our country.
And obviously, as I just saw on Jimmy Kimmel the other night, somebody running around interviewing people about the 4th of July, and some people don't even know what the day means.
Yes, there is actually, I put it on my Facebook page, which is Ladies, Can We Talk? I urge your listeners to go to that. There was actually, maybe there's a different video than you saw, but it was on the beach in San Diego, people there for the July 4th weekend, interviewed by someone with a video camera just saying, what is the reason for the July 4th holiday? And I'm telling you, the range of ages and backgrounds of people who had simply no idea. They thought maybe it related to the Civil War. They weren't sure what country we were freed from. They didn't have any idea who the signers were. They knew nothing about it. And why I think that's so dangerous is our country is kind of, as you were talking about a moment ago, founded by people who said, we're going to stand up for liberty. And America's a leader and has been since its inception with the idea that freedom matters and freedom is really the right of everyone. And if you don't have people today holding on to that concept and insisting on it, you're more susceptible in American society to losing it because you don't see it being pulled away from you. You don't recognize liberty drifting away from the American political conversation.
I know you're passionate about history, and so am I. Take us back to 1776. What was the climate? They're escaping a Great Britain that was tyranny, wasn't it?
It was tyranny, and it's so interesting. I remind myself of this often. Those founders were British. They were subjects of the king. That was their legal status in the world. But they were resentful about, number one, just taxation without representation. And they had had a series of battles back and forth with King George, trying to stand up against him. And then he would impose an even more onerous, ruling or edict on them. And really what they saw as onerous and as an affront to their liberty were things like oppressive taxes, oppressive regulations, regulation of their businesses. And it's kind of funny because today the arguments about tax structure and even regulation are kind of the same thing. We're talking again today about oppressive regulation from the federal government, oppressive control of society, and taxation. What's the purpose of taxation? Is it just to raise enough money to do what the government needs to do, or is it to regulate and, in the case of America today, redistribute wealth?
What do you think the founding fathers would think about this country today if they were to, wake up 250 years later and see this?
They would say, what has happened to your spirit of freedom? What has happened to your love of freedom? And we have, among many challenges America faces today, we have more and more people who are not living in self-dependence, self-reliance. They're living in dependence on the government. And that entire structure of basing a society on the idea of self-reliance, of it's legendary in the world that hardy, can-do American spirit. It came from the founding ideas, and it did hang on in America for a while, but we're at this place now where dependence and lack of self-reliance is almost seen as a right or a virtue. We have many too many people dependent on the government and not really bothered that they are.
The Founding Fathers were completely against big government, were they not?
They certainly were. The idea of this whole we the people, this enshrining of power in the hands of the people, the Founding Fathers created something that should give the most rights and virtues and freedom to the little guy, the individual person. They were trying to say to each person, you have all this liberty and potential. Go out there and make something of it. They were trying to preserve the power of the little guy, which is very opposite of the collectivist thinking that has embraced some American policies and politicians.
And let's talk about the role of the politician. Did the Founding Fathers imagine a career politician?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question, Jeff. No, they didn't. The whole idea, trying to get away from a king who obviously had power merely by the fact of his heritage, that he was in the line of succession of royalty. They were trying to say we're governed by ourselves, by people, and the idea was to elect people to go to Congress, to hold on to this precious country, but not to make a career out of it. It's one of the biggest problems we have in Washington and, frankly, in Texas and maybe other places in America, where people get elected to Washington or Austin, get elected to office, and they become part of the ruling class. And I don't think it happens necessarily intentionally. It just happens. And so when you're part of that ruling class, you think you're kind of entitled to stay there, kind of like the kings thought.
Do you think back in 1776 and when the country was born, and then the lawmaker would still have a job? I mean, they were a farmer, and then they would go to Washington, right? They were a doctor, and they would go and come from Washington. Do you lose focus, or do you lose kind of a perspective when you become a career politician?
Absolutely, you do. I've loved the idea, some people have said, is you ought to require anyone, certainly before they become president, maybe even before they become a senator, member of Congress, to run a business, own a business, earn money, pay taxes. Because I think if you have a Congress of 435 people who've all lived in real life America, have been doctors, architects, even hourly workers, whatever their jobs were, they bring the real person's perspective to Washington. And then if they don't stay there too long, they hold on to it. And then the next group comes in. That's a healthier representation of the people.
Our guest right now, Debbie Georgatos, the author of Ladies, Can We Talk? America Needs Our Vote. Let's talk about president, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. You also see kind of a lifetime politician going into the White House, do you not? The last few presidents have spent a whole lifetime in the bubble, so to speak.
That is very true, and it does raise a question. Some people argue that maybe we're better off having a complete outsider to Washington. I think it's a hard question, because I think you want a president who understands government, understands the system a little bit, but you really, more than anything, want someone who understands what America is supposed to be all about, what the Declaration meant, what the Constitution means, what limited federal government means. You want someone who understands the whole American picture, and maybe you don't have to have been in government to have that. In fact, maybe if you've rolled along for a decade or more as part of the ruling class, you kind of lose track of what that whole concept of government exists to preserve American liberty. It exists to preserve the rights of we the people. It doesn't exist to become a self-perpetuating rulemaker. And so it's a hard thing, because I think I could see some candidates who are currently interested in the White House seen as just too far outside the bubble. But I don't know. I think a lot of them bring the real American perspective.
And I think about, the speedboat and the ocean liner. The ocean liner takes a long time to make a turn, and the speedboat can just zip along. Our country built on entrepreneurship, and I think sometimes big bloated government is like that ocean liner. It's slow to change. It's not efficient. Talk about that.
I actually recall, I majored in political science in college, and I really focused on American history. I recall the argument that the founders tried to bring an idea of incrementalism, meaning they didn't want such a powerful executive that a new president could come in and change everything in 2 days. I mean, the idea was to have kind of buy-in of the American people through their representatives in Congress and the Senate. It wasn't designed to have someone come in and just whip everything into shape or change everything radically quickly. I think it was more of they use the term incrementalism over and over. So I think that is a virtue. I don't think you want to have a dictator-style thinking where you just turn everything over overnight. It's also true that government can be slow to change, slow to address problems, and it's a hard thing because it's not just the Congress and the president, but it's also the massive bureaucracy of the administrative branch of the EPA and many other agencies that are very hard to. They're like barnacles on a boat. They've kind of jammed up the system.
Talk about the party system in America today. What was the party system like when the country was first born?
Well, it's interesting, they didn't exist in our present-day form, of course. And I just was talking recently about how the parties are perceived today versus what the public perception is versus the truth about it. And I'll just say, other countries have, for example, England has a system with many political parties, and so does Israel and other what we think of as democracies. America kind of settled in a pretty strong two-party system, but not right away. The Republican Party was founded in 1861 entirely to fight slavery. It was the reason they were created. It was their purpose in existence. And so before that, the party, I don't feel like I'm a scholar enough to speak to the parties at the early founding, except to say people started taking sides, and they were more or less, if I could kind of theoretical division of them, it was just, does government control a lot, or is this more of a liberty thing? There was do we need to have a central bank? Do we need to have control in Washington, or should the control be more in the individual state? So those battles went on at the founding. They still go on today.
I know one of the things you're very passionate about is just people getting involved. I mean, it makes me sad to think that people are getting their news from Reddit or Twitter or something like that. They're really they're not informed, are they, Debbie?
They're not. And we're blessed in a way in America right now. There are so many sources of news. If you're not informed, it's because you're not trying. And I really think even if you try to get most of your news from the internet, you can still do that from many sources. And I really urge people, whatever your political persuasion is, to look at some of the websites on the other side from where you stand, because you do get perspective, you get understanding. And I think I think the internet's actually still a great source of news, but there are many sites, and I don't know about the particular ones you mentioned, but many sites that have just such a bent to them that I think we have to be careful not to read one thing and think, oh, that's what the truth is because I read it on the internet.
Right. And then I think there's, I can speak from being a journalist of 25 years. It seems like now even the media is dividing itself. And so people listening to one channel for all of their news, they're not getting both sides necessarily, are they?
Oh, they're not at all. They're not getting both sides, and they're actually getting misled about the state of affairs in America. You don't really have a clear picture if you just read one little side. And I'll say, just as one example ongoing right now, we don't have to get the details of it, but Donald Trump made some very controversial statements. If you read what he said versus how it's being spun, it's very different. And that kind of goes to a point I love to make. It's really important to go to the source. If you hear someone say, candidate X or politician Y said this, before you spout off about that and write a blog post about it, go back and see what they actually said and the context, because everyone's entitled to be treated at least fairly and with some sense of ethics about what they really said. Maybe you don't like Donald Trump's statements, or you do, but they're not what the media is characterizing them as, or there's plenty of things you can find that misrepresent what he said.
Debbie, we're out of time for this segment. Give us your website.
I actually urge people to go to the Facebook page, Ladies Can We Talk, and our website is ladiescanwetalk.org. And my show, can I mention the show?
Yeah, please.
It's on Sunday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. on 660 a.m. The Answer. Ladies Can We Talk is lots of fun. And Jeff, this was lots of fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Debbie, this was wonderful. I sure appreciate it. Just ahead, it's the 4th of July, but we're talking Christmas when we come back. Christmas in July. We'll explain next.